stability is an enemy to those sorts of cultural revolutions that want to upend everything.
Yeah.
And so home life, because it is maybe one of the most stabilizing forces in the human person's life, is always going to be an enemy to a cultural revolution that wants to unmask and unmake everything.
Welcome to the Homeschool Connections podcast. I'm your host, Kaitlin Zara, and I'm so glad you're spending some time with me today. New episodes drop every week, so make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell if you're watching on YouTube. All right, mamas, grab your coffee, press play, and let's homeschool together. Today, I am so excited to welcome Noelle Mering to the show. She is an incredibly influential voice and writes a lot about culture, politics, and faith. You might have even seen her on Fox News or EWTN. Noelle, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be with you.
I am so excited to have this conversation. And Noelle, you talk a lot about reclaiming traditional roles in a modern world. So I'd
Right.
love to dive in today to all things trad wife, quote unquote. What does that term mean to you? I know it's gotten pretty popular over the last few years. And is it helpful or limiting for women?
Yeah, good question. I think in some ways it probably has a different connotation to different people. And I think I take sort of a middle ground approach to it. I don't think that the trad wife movement should be dismissed, nor do I think that it should be considered sort of the goal for every woman. Depending on how you're interpreting that phrase. So I think, largely it's considered more of an online movement of women returning to domesticity, to sort of all the beautiful old crafts of home care, which include, making sourdough bread and bone
Yeah.
broth and gardening. And then also, traditional roles in marriage, so that husbands tending to be the breadwinner, women being more at home. I think in some ways it's an understandable movement. It's reacting to sort of decades, I think, of denigrating home life and
Mhm.
elevation of the girl boss kind of icon.
Yeah.
So, I think it's sort of a natural reaction to that. My only caution would be that I think, insofar as things remain in the reactionary level, they can tend to become superficial avatars that can
Mm.
actually do somewhat of damage themselves. So I think, particularly as Catholics and people who are striving, who value, study and homeschooling, and that we're trying to think pretty deeply about things. And so we never want to trade the substantive for the performative. And so I think that would be something just to consider as we're thinking about the trad wife movement. I know neither want to dismiss it, nor do I want to kind of give it more, I think, importance than I think it needs to have. It could just be a neat, fun movement that is inspiring women. And,
Yeah.
one criticism I hear of it sometimes is that it's too focused on the aesthetics, having maybe too much of a
Mhm.
perfection and the way you keep your home. And
Yeah.
and I understand that critique. One thing I would say is that almost every movement begins with something aspirational. I mean, I think that's what we've been doing with the life of the career woman for so long, is that we've been
Mhm.
portraying, not necessarily so much the sweat as much as the kind of you're hustling to make it, and, you're burnt out, but you're going to, it's really going to be ultimately like sort of a beautiful thing. And so the trad wife movement, so far as they're doing that as similar, maybe aspirational, go into those places. I understand, that I think that's just kind of normal. So, my only hesitation is that, I don't think that we need to define. Wouldn't want to define womanhood in a way that is purely reactionary. That I think we have a positive vision of womanhood that is deeper and richer and more robust and substantive than sort of an avatar, or, whatever too much online portrayal of it can seem like it's reducing us to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because the values that the trad wife kind of embodies, those things that you talk about in Theology of Home, are eternal, right? They transcend every generation. Wanting to make a warm home for your husband and children is a beautiful thing. But like you said, we can get caught up in seeing those sourdough starters on someone's counter and seeing, gardens and things that really just become, like you said, an avatar of that original model that we do love so much as women. And in speaking of Theology of Home, in many ways, that book really represents, seemingly right now, it's a countercultural message. So, why do you think domestic life has been so devalued in modern society? Why do we have that? People will sometimes say, oh, you're just a stay at home mom.
Mhm.
Why did our culture fall into that trap?
Yeah, well, I mean, I write about this a lot in Awake Not Woke and an upcoming book I'm writing called No Contact. But secular ideologies, atheistic ideologies, always attack the family and the faith. So they're always a process of inverting things that are actually really good for us. So it's going to take
Mhm.
things like the beauty of marriage and relationship between men and women. Instead of finding the, harmony and the ability to kind of see each other's differences as opportunities for reverence and mystery and appreciation and gratitude and um, it tends to sort of exacerbate those differences into a point of competition. So, a power struggle, an opportunity for conflict that one must be defeated in order for the other to be triumphed. Um, I think that in that exacerbation of those differences, we lose sort of the beauty of the differences. And
Mhm.
so I think part of that his process has been making the hidden and higher things of home life and domesticity seem really oppressive,
Yeah.
because they are so deeply human. That's how we. If you lose the significance of family, people walk through the world without a sense of belonging, protection, without a sense of security, without a feeling of being known and loved. And we reduce our significance to being one of utility out in the public world. It's really in the context of the home life that people learn those real human goods that we all need. And if we don't get them in home life, then we start walking through the world looking for them in sort of false ways. So, I mean, I think you can
Mhm.
analogize this, and I think I do in Awake Not Woke, to gang life. Young men at risk join gangs because they want security, they want protection,
Mm.
belonging, they want an identity, they want to feel important, all things that should happen in the home. So even short of, the extreme of gang life, I think we try to find that sort of significance and belonging in other ways. Hyper political tribalism, maybe, putting too much stock in human respect, and maybe the likes and clicks of social media.
Mhm.
All these things are just natural human desires that if they're not fulfilled rightly, they're going to be fulfilled wrongly or disorderly in the society. And so home is so crucial to stabilizing and creating, mature and responsible adults. And so, insofar as secular and atheistic ideologies really strive for instability in order to sort of deconstruct and um, unstabilize things, stability is an enemy to those sorts of cultural revolutions that want to upend everything.
Yeah.
And so, home life, because it is maybe one of the most stabilizing forces in the human person's life, is always going to be an enemy to a cultural revolution that wants to unmask and unmake everything.
Yeah, absolutely, Noelle. You said one word there that really stuck out to me, and it was oppressive. And I keep thinking about this is even coming up more and more after the passing of Charlie Kirk, and as we're watching Erica. This idea that, motherhood or being a wife is oppressive, and this idea that comes up of submitting to your husband. And I know that that is super controversial to people who maybe don't understand what it means in the context of faith. Can you talk a little bit about that idea of submitting?
Yeah, no, it's beautiful and it's so important and it's so hard for the modern mind to wrap itself around, I think, because in the reductive lens of power, submission makes no sense. Really, service makes no sense. Like the
Mhm.
idea, the call is either to dominate or to serve. And Christ's call and his path is the path of service. And so if you're understanding submission through the lens of power and oppression, it's only gonna come out as a fraught relationship.
Mhm.
If you're looking at it through the lens of grace, mercy, and the call to serve, the servium that Christ asks us to do, that all of us are called to do. We're all
Yeah.
called to submit our wills to God first and foremost. But in the hierarchy of the family life, that submission is humanized in a beautiful way. And I loved what Erica said when she said, "Men, your wife is not your slave. She's not your servant. She's your helper." And
Mhm.
be a leader leadership is for the sake of serving. And that beautiful letter he would write to her every Saturday and say, "How can I serve you better as your
Mhm.
husband?" This is the sort of marriage that I'm blessed and grateful to have, and ones that my dear friends have. And so, sort of, the question of the stereotype and kind of caricature of what that looks like having headship in a home, I think is so foreign to people who are actually living it out with the true fullness of the faith that is built on love. And, the woman, I think, there's a really beautiful dynamic where women tend to be very cons- uh, concerned with the particulars, right? I've got
Mhm.
this child, he's got to be up at this time, and he's gonna freak out if I don't read the book in just that way. And this kid has a nut allergy. Obviously dads know these things too, but there is a womanly way in which we are kind of like the experts of the domain of the home life. Um, And the man, therefore, there has to be it. I think it's a beautiful combination to have the women know all these particulars and the man be able to just
Mhm.
be, okay, well, let's pull ourselves out of the particulars and see, okay, we have to do X, Y, and Z, or this child is struggling here. In teammates, you're both concerned with the particulars, but I think there's a different way that sometimes when I am, pregnant or postpartum or, when the kids were crying or something and I would be kind of in my emotions, my husband could step out and help coax me out of those emotions into sort of just a bigger picture. So anyway, I mean, that's a convoluted way of saying it's hard to describe because it isn't an avatar, it isn't a caricature, but it is a beautiful way of being in the world that I think appreciates the difference of the other without necessarily relegating it to very particular roles. So my husband
Mhm.
cooks way more than I do. I've hardwired lamps into my ceiling,
Yep.
it's not about the roles and relegations so much as it is about a way of being that is masculine and feminine and appreciates and honors both.
Absolutely, Noelle. And I think so many of our listeners are really gonna resonate with what you said. Us moms, we do tend to feel like we've got a running list in our heads
Yeah.
all the time. And as we're sleeping, we're still thinking about the needs of our children and our husbands and our homes and what we're gonna get a head start on for the next day. It's just a constant. And I can tell that my husband's brain is not wired the same way, but the way that he thinks supports our family in our home in a unique way that I couldn't. And so just like you said, it's really just the working together, the teamwork of fulfilling each other's needs and then fulfilling what you know that the other, it's not their specialty to do that thing. Emily Brown from Fiat Life Coaching offers premium support for Catholic homeschooling moms to learn essential skills to manage their time, other people's behavior, and their own mental and emotional well being. Get all the details for her signature program, the Happy Holy Mama membership, at fiatlifecoaching.com.
That's right. That's right. And I think, what makes all the difference is that men, there being a sense that the husband understands that the home life is the most important part of all of our lives, I mean, outside second to the faith. But, I think one of the ways that things go astray is when you get the sense that, all of us have elevated careers to be more important than family life. It's not just women. Sometimes men are pulled to do that too. And so they can understandably feel that the urgent part of their day is all surrounding work. Sometimes that makes sense. There are, demands upon that work places on you that really need to be prioritized in particulars. But in the grand scheme of things, I think a husband setting the tone and making clear to his family that actually, when I get home at the end of the day, this is when the most important part of my life starts. All of that was for the sake of this. And I think that helps with three aspects of that sort of masculine feminine dynamic. One, um, it reminds the wife that her mission is deeply important and dignified,
Mhm.
that he's not grasping for something outside of the home that is somehow he's communicating either through his priorities or through his where he gives most of his thought or his intentionality, that somehow that is more important. And this is sort of the small stuff that no, insofar as he's dignifying the home as the priority, it reminds her of the dignity of what she's doing if she's a stay-at-home mom. Secondly, I think it also gives them a unity of purpose, that they are unified in their common project of the domestic life, regardless of, a kind of a calculation of who spends how much time away from the home versus in the home or whatever.
Mhm.
None of that matters. It's all secondary to the fact that this is what we understand to both be important and beautiful and important and crucial to our lives. And that ordering a proper hierarchy of priorities, I think, is the call of the woman, but also the call of the man. And setting that tone, I think, can sort of transform that sense of um, kind of competition or rivalry.
Yeah. Beautiful. It sounds like you have just kind of answered one of my other questions, which was how can husbands support and elevate the domestic vocation of their wives? I think that everything you just said really touches on that. And I think that as women, we so desperately we want this. When our husbands finish up work, I want to feel that he has saved some energy for us and he is excited to be with us. And it's funny, Noelle, I'm going to tell you from my own life. I'm home with my children now homeschooling, and at the end of the day, I feel I'm usually like burnt out, right? I'm really tired. We've had a great day. And my husband will always, he works it from home, but he'll come upstairs and he'll be like, "What are we doing tonight? Where do you want to go? What should we do?" And he's full of energy for us. And I'm amazed by that. Usually I'm like, "Oh, Joe, give me a minute." I've been out with them all day and I don't know if I have the energy to go out again. But he is the more enthusiastic of the both of us to
Mm.
say, "I can't wait to like get ice cream or take the boys to play tennis or get to the park with them," and how important that is in just the partnership that we share.
Yeah, that's right. It's just in those small moments. It's not like a big trip to Disneyland necessarily. It's in those
Mhm.
ordinary, everyday, sort of hidden, unsung moments that really it just dictates the way we live our lives, and that which this how we live a Tuesday on a 3 p.m. In the afternoon
Mhm.
is oftentimes how we're living the rest of our lives. Are we living it with sort of that desire to have that kind of spirit of service and unity and affection and prior that those proper ordering of our priorities? I think
Yeah.
it's so beautiful and so important. And, for both people in the marriage to be doing that, I remember when I was really burnt out in the earlier motherhood days, all of a sudden realizing I had gotten to a habit every day when my husband came home of giving him a litany of the things that went wrong. And then I just
Mhm.
realized at one point, what would it feel like to come home to that? That would feel awful. And so I decided to change. And, likewise, my husband has had internal moments where he realized, when I pull into the driveway, I'm going to say, here I go and jump in it
Yeah.
and be who can I serve? And so he would come home and he'd grab the baby and give me a glass of wine and he would make dinner, with a baby in one arm. And
Good
I started
man.
being like, I love you. Thank you.
Yes.
Put someone put him on Time magazine, when
Yes,
when everyone's
absolutely. Husband of the year.
yeah, when everyone's trying to reorient their framework and reframe their life into that sort of how's this for the other person? How am I what are they perceiving for me? How can I give them more? How can I love them better? It's a beautiful way to live. And so,
Mhm.
even the question of, submission, it's a good question. I'm glad you asked it. I'm not saying it's not a good
Mhm.
question but the fact that it is such a controversial thing now is
Mhm.
just a sign of how poorly maybe most people's experiences of this dynamic
Yes.
is.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to dive in a little bit more to that innate feeling that a lot of women have, and you speak about in Theology of Home, to create a home, to make a house into a home. And I want to talk specifically about secular feminism and the consumer culture and how that shapes the way women think about home and motherhood and femininity. We are bombarded with, home goods runs and Target and Starbucks runs and getting Amazon Prime overnight. So, how does that culture of consumerism kind of shape and change and alter this idea that women just naturally want to make a house into a home?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, it's a temptation, I think, for all of us towards materialism. But I think underlying that instinct and the way that it often is done poorly now is that it becomes like sort of a worldview of materialism where sort of
Mhm.
matter is all that there is. And so the human person really gets lost, not only human person, but the goods, that things that make him and her happy. And so I think we tend to commodify things and so far as we're doing that, you can see a lot of like sort of the really more dramatic consequences of that worldview, which is that, once I think that the human person can be commodified, then I can instrumentalize them for my own will or my own pleasure, my own
Mhm.
designs, my own power. And so you can see, this actually in a darker way leads to a lot of abuse of the human person
Mhm.
because we've become blinded to sort of the real goodness and dignity of what it means to be human. So, insofar as we're in a hyper commodified culture, that's a real danger. On the smaller, on the more just normal human temptation level, I wrote somewhere, maybe it was in one of the Theology of Homes, about striking difference between luxury and beauty, where I had read this article in the New York Times or somewhere about this woman who, built her perfect dream home, and she realized at the end of it that the human persons entering the home were now a threat to her home because they might harm the perfection of it.
Mhm.
So I think she sold it and then bought something modest and then just lived a happy life or something. I
Mhm.
quite remember the outcome, but we all have that experience where you can be in a home where it seems like it's too perfect, it's too much of a showpiece, and you don't sense love versus, and then you can be in a very modest home, I went to visit a family that was lived very modestly, but it was beautiful. And I walked around their house taking pictures of the nooks and corners because there was so much love in it. She had framed her children's artwork in this beautiful way and organized, bought flour in bulk and put it in these beautiful decanters and had a shelf of them. And, just these simple ways that I could tell somebody is caring for this place out of love and intentionality. And, there's a poverty of spirit and detachment that's really beautiful, but still there's order. And, there's messes too, and there's kids crying and it's not perfect, but there's real love there. And so I think that is sort of the difference between luxury and beauty, where luxury tends to be self-referential. It's about me. And beauty is
Mhm.
calls us to transcendence, calls us to something beyond, some mystery and otherness that's somewhat veiled.
Amazing. You just spoke directly to the heart of the homeschooling mom. You certainly did, because as we struggle to keep our houses clean and try to keep up with the Joneses, a lot of us in a lot of ways, to keep our homes looking trendy and new and clean, it is really hard to do. And you reminded me of a time when I had guests over for dinner who had never been to my home recently. And they walked in and they looked around and they're like, "Your house is so homey. It's so cozy." And to one person, that might sound insulting, but to me, it was really a tremendous compliment because
Yeah.
there were markers around and there are scuffs on my furniture. And I do my best to take care of everything around here, but there is a tremendous amount of love and it shows.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love that. People can sense it. It's a feeling, It should evoke some sort of feeling. Maybe that feeling sometimes for us is like, "Oh my gosh, there's so much I have to do." You just look,
Yes.
you see all you see is tasks. But even for us that we can sort of striving to kind of when we're getting into that just I'm a task-oriented person only and always, remind yourselves, that's the point
Mhm.
of prayer, right? That's the point of being
Mhm.
together as a family. All these things are ways of saying like you're not just about your utility, you have a deeper meaning here. Be with me, abide with each other, abide with our Lord. Just be with your small child, even though you're not maybe getting things done. So yeah,
Mhm.
the mom struggle of all times.
Yes, absolutely. And I really want to speak to that mom who is struggling. And there are a lot of us moms who are homeschooling or we're home with children, but we're also working moms. And
Mhm.
so I think that, like you said, it is trendy, but it is also really beautiful to embody a lot of those qualities of a trad wife. The woman who wants to make her family homemade meals, that's beautiful. Someone who wants to tend to their home and clean it and be there for her children, all wonderful, wonderful things. So, to the mom who is working and giving of herself outside of the home as well, can she still embody those same ideals? And if so, do you have any advice for striking that perfect balance?
Yeah, I think that she can, and it depends on how you define trad wife. So I think, maybe the solution is, that trad wife is sort of what you're saying. So that right hierarchy of priority, and prioritizing the family. So if you're working mom, are you still making sure, just as we were talking about with men, am I still making sure that my family's where it's at? And I'm someone who has, there's seasons in motherhood for many years, I was a homeschooling mom, and then even when my kids went into a classical Catholic school, I still was an at-home mom. And then, as the little ones get older, and we weren't, blessed with more children, then
Mhm.
I start taking on some working at home, and now, we're at the place where I travel
Mhm.
more increasingly for work. But my husband works from home, so he's almost always home when I'm gone, and anyway, so we're making it work, but I think the point of being sort of embracing those kind of traditional values is just saying that, even if it looks different, I'm still keeping my priorities where they ought to be. And so I talk with my
Mhm.
husband about every trip, do you think this is worth me doing as he would with me? How does this make sense with our family? How are you if I'm gone this week or for a couple days here? We check in with each other because we are our priority.
Mhm.
And so, I think I don't use that moniker "trad wife" maybe because I'm just too old and
No.
I feel like it's a younger
No.
woman's terminology, but the spirit of embracing domestic life and having those rightly ordered priorities is where it's at. And
That's it.
Theology of Home too, actually, we made a point of profiling all sorts of women who were infertile, women who were single,
Mhm.
women who were professionals, women who had 9 children,
Mhm.
um, religious sisters, just say
Mhm,
that, the point is not that everyone's life is going to look exactly the same, more that
mhm.
there's a common thread of service and bearing fruit in the world, and, answering God's call, whatever circumstances he's given you.
That's so beautiful. That speaks to my heart in more ways than I can tell you. We'd have to talk for a really long time for me to explain it, but it just speaks to my heart, and I think that's gonna really touch a lot of our listeners today.
Okay.
Noelle, before we wrap up, I just want to give you the floor. If there's anything else that you'd want to share with the homeschooling Catholic mom who's listening, who's in the throes of motherhood, she's trying to keep her house clean, she's trying to cook her family those meals and keep that strong bond with her husband, be there for her children. What else would you like to say to her before we wrap things up today?
Such a good question. And I feel like there's so many things you could say, but avoiding discouragement and focusing on um our our emotional ambiance in the home, find to be so important. That I think that we can teach our kids all the right things and all the right truths and the practices and all of the good things in life. But if it's done in a way that is sort of um too task oriented, maybe too much grumpiness, our moods
Mhm.
affecting the environment too much. I think it's not going to be communicated in that deeper way that we need to communicate it. And so I think we want to have a spirit of lightness in the home, make our families fun. I've been saying that for years. Make your marriage fun, make your family fun. My
Yeah.
husband and I do have something called family revival. That is part, and that's a big part of it. It's just that spirit of lightness and fun and affection. The kids, when they leave the home, you want them to think back and think back fondly on their time
Mhm.
there. Not just think like, my family was right about so many things, but think about, I know that they were right because I know that they enjoyed it too. That there was a joy, there was a fruit of joy that came out of living that life that, and sometimes it felt very countercultural.
Beautiful. Noelle, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to leave in the show notes links to your books, Awake Not Woke, the Theology of Home series. I know you're working on another book. You have so many wonderful things going on. So we're going to have all of that in the show notes linked below for you guys. I know you'll be interested to learn more about Noelle after this interview. Noelle, thanks so much again for being here with me today.
It was so fun. Thanks for having me.
This isn't the end of the conversation. I want to hear from you. Come say hi on Instagram, connect with me on Facebook, or leave a comment below. I want to know what today's conversation sparked in you. I read and respond to every message. Until next time, remember, you got this.